7 Nights and 8 Days. Patricia, Asedegbega, Nietu. For Ori, Ani, Sheila, Antoinette, and Esther, the very special ladies who were my travelling companions for 7 nights and 8 days, as we embarked on the popular walk with the intention of arriving at the Cathedral of St. James. There was camaraderie, laughter, some good old-fashioned light bickering, moments of frustration, and some really interesting conversations at dinner time. Isn't that what life is all about? A journey packed full of diverse emotions, during which we hope to find the right travelling companions to share the experience with, as each day we take one more step to completing our personal walks. Also, for Onofwe, Maria, and Valerie, who encouraged us from a distance via WhatsApp, and Bea, who joined us on the last day as we entered victoriously into Santiago. Finally, for Ana Pintor, who I walked the first Camino de Santiago with, the kind where you leave by 6 or 7 a.m. to get a place in a pilgrim's hostel at the next stop. Buen Camino, girls. Emma. She stood on the escalator descending to the platform and joined the back of the queue of people waiting to board the train. Her bagged picnic breakfast in one hand and her suitcase in the other, she followed the slowly moving line as tickets and identification were shown to the officials. Oh good, she thought. She got a window seat. It had been a bit of a struggle to find a spot for her suitcase. She finally had to put it in the overhead compartment a few seats away from hers. There were so many people on the same train, each with their luggage, for which they tried to secure an overhead space as they chatted excitedly in what she could only assume was Spanish. She could not understand what they were saying, but if there was one thing she was good at, it was reading moods and emotions. She could feel the relaxation in the air, people letting go of everyday stresses accumulated during the year. A group of women talked loudly next to her, but this did not bother her in the least bit. On the contrary, it was all part of the experience. An elderly man soon sat next to her, nodding whilst mouthing, "Hola." She replied with a smile and the same word as she settled in her perfect seat next to the window and closed her eyes to an incredible feeling of freedom. The train started to move slowly, and she opened her eyes as an attendant went seat by seat, offering earphones to listen to the movie that was about to be shown on the screen hung from the ceiling a few meters away. Emma didn't really want to sleep. She wanted to see every bit of the journey as the train travelled through different cities and villages till she reached her destination. She had barely been able to rest in her hotel room the previous night, or the night before that when she had left England for Spain. She had needed to be at Heathrow almost at dawn, and so had called a cab to take her to the airport, a luxury she would normally not have permitted herself. However, she was throwing caution to the wind. This was supposed to be a new beginning, and in this new beginning, she was not going to calculate the difference in cost between the various available options of transportation. She was going to go with the fastest and most comfortable route. She deserved it. Armed with her little book of simple Spanish phrases for tourists, she landed at the Adolfo Suarez Airport in Madrid. After claiming her baggage, she had again ignored the signs leading her to where she could catch the train to her hotel. She had researched alternative routes that would help her arrive at her accommodation, which was only 3 stops away by train from the airport. But once she got out into the street and was slapped by the hot Madrid air, she discarded every bit of research she'd done. She took one look at her suitcase and stuck the carefully written instructions back into her bag, heading towards the line of passengers queuing up for a cab. Lorenza. She angrily brushed away a tear running down her face. Not a single word in the dictionary could describe what she was feeling at that moment. Her phone was switched off. If she responded to a single message or picked up a call, she would say something she would regret for the rest of her life. She was a very sincere person, blessed with a strong character, and that mixture could be quite explosive when she was feeling how she was feeling at that very moment. Her mother had always advised her to count to 10 when she got upset, to avoid having confrontations that would only lead to regrets. She had counted up to 100 and then started again, and she was still struggling to find words to indicate just how furious she was. "Hey!" she exclaimed angrily at the woman who had placed her suitcase in the very spot she was about to put hers, above her seat. Did she not see her reach out to raise hers? She bit her lip to stop the angry flow of unflattering Italian words destined for her. The woman gave her a blank stare, ignored her, and took a seat. She looked at her seat number and couldn't help rolling her eyes and letting out an angry exclamation. Just her luck. She was seated right next to the lovely woman who had taken her suitcase space knowingly. There was no doubt in her mind that she had known exactly what she was doing. She was probably one of those people who would steal a parking spot right under your nose and walk away nonchalantly. Lorenza took another long, deep breath to try to steady herself, feeling deflated as another tear rolled down her face. She put on her sunglasses even though it was not yet 7 a.m. She hated crying in public. She could count the number of times she had cried in all her 32 years on one hand, and she wouldn't use up all her fingers. This was not how things were supposed to have happened. She was angry with so many people, but most of all, she was angry with herself. Helen. With the military precision that characterized her husband, Robert had ordered a taxi to pick them up from their hotel at 6 a.m. to go to the train station. They had arrived from Boston the previous evening. It had been such a long flight, and they had all been exhausted. As a result, they had gone straight to bed after a light meal. Helen had never visited Spain before, and she was finding the people so friendly and helpful. She would have wanted to explore a bit of the city, but their hotel was near the airport and away from the city. Added to that, neither her husband nor her grandson had seemed interested in doing any sightseeing. So she stayed behind, as not speaking the language made her feel too insecure to venture out by herself. The alternative had been to sit through an insufferable dinner with them, neither willing to break the uncomfortable silence that had been following them for quite some time. Robert, her husband, was a stickler for rules, punctuality being one of them, so they had gotten to the train station well on time. The travel agency had given them various options on how to get to their destination. She insisted on Madrid, with the hope of getting to know a new place different to the city they would end up in. They got first-class tickets so they could travel more comfortably. As she settled in her seat, happy with the thought that they had made it on time and that the journey was beginning, she hoped she would have someone to talk to on the trip. Being a very sociable person and finding it easy to make friends, she hoped she'd find someone who spoke her language. She sighed as she looked at Robert and Jason, her grandson. One was reading the newspaper, and the other was, as usual, lost in whatever he usually did on his iPad. She tried to start up a conversation a few times, but every attempt was met with grunts from both men that she had been forced to accept and interpret their meanings. Things needed to be fixed, and if this trip didn't do it, then she had no idea what could. Esohe. She looked around her apartment one last time before shutting the front door. All her stuff was still packed in boxes. She hadn't been able to bring herself to unpack them. That would mean acceptance. The truth was, she had no idea what to do or where to go. The train to Schiphol Airport was packed full of travelers, like her, holding suitcases. August was a popular vacation month, and people were coming and going in and out of Amsterdam. She was one of those people leaving. After checking in her luggage and going through security, she sat down nervously next to a flight information panel, waiting for the gate for her flight to Madrid to be announced. There was a tingly feeling in her stomach. She had not been in that airport or any other airport in 6 years, and her first trip was meant to be different. She looked up in a bid to distract the tears threatening to fall down her face. There was no use wishing things had turned out differently. She had stopped expecting to wake up and suddenly find out that it had all been a bad dream. The boxes sealed and stacked in her parlour were a constant reminder of her present situation. She had held on to all the good things in her life like a lifeline. It was going to be a new beginning. She had walked the streets of Amsterdam with a silly smile on her face. Second chances were difficult to come by, and she knew there was no way she could have let it pass by. Alas, it had been a brief stop. Her opportunity had not come to stay, and for a fragment of a second, she had felt like there was no longer a place for her in this world. Then, out of nowhere, the image of her mother appeared, leaving her with the thought that if she didn't have enough strength to love herself, there were a good number of people who would love her to make up for it. Esohe held on to those thoughts fiercely, even though they provided her with no clue on how to proceed. How was she going to be able to glue back the shattered pieces of her life? She held on tightly to her boarding pass to Madrid, praying that somehow this trip would offer the solution that the last 6 years hadn't. Sean reclined in the back seat of the hired car. The last 2 days had been quite intense. He had merely asked a friend what one could do in Oporto and had gotten swamped with invitations from acquaintances and business partners. Word had gotten around that he was in town, and he had not been able to keep his 2 days' stay under the radar as he would have much preferred. Still, he had been able to rest, which had become a luxury for him. To be fair, visiting one of the most prominent wine cellars in the country and having a private wine tasting could not be considered as work. Plus, he had been able to avoid going to a few lunches and dinners. All he had really wanted was to be able to sleep. He couldn't remember when last he had done that, and a good night's sleep was something money couldn't buy. Even on his last vacation to Seychelles, he had spent a lot of time on his phone and laptop, to the great annoyance of his friends, who, from the look of things, had invited Angela with them to try and make a match of them. He sighed as he thought that everyone around him was trying to introduce him to one suitable woman or the other. Angela was a model and looked and acted the part. Sonia, the friend they both shared, had said, "She is your type." To be fair, it had been his type for a good number of years. The trip had ended with him saying he would call her. It suddenly hit him that he had never gotten around to doing that. This would probably explain Sonia leaving him various voicemails asking him to return her calls. He let out another sigh. He wished people would leave him alone. He had too much on his plate as it was. The words, "You need to find yourself again," kept echoing in his mind. He had been unable to shake them off. After shocking everyone with his announcement that he was taking 2 weeks off, during which he was not to be contacted under any circumstances, he packed his bags, did a brief online search, and embarked on the journey he was currently on. Chapter 1. The train ride had not had the desired effect of calming her down. Her lovely seat companion had spent half an hour or more on her phone talking at the top of her voice, oblivious to the effect it had on those around her. This at least helped her realize she could understand a bit of Spanish. I mean, who wouldn't at that volume? Lorenza had shot a few murderous looks in her direction, but the woman just kept talking. That, added to the 5 times she had been made to get up for her to pass by, ruined the possibility of sleeping. She had been tempted to ask her to just switch her window seat with hers, but then that would have meant having an actual conversation, and she could not trust herself that it would be a civil one. When she calculated the train was halfway to its destination, she got up to get a coffee at the cafeteria. It had been announced at the beginning of the trip that this was available to passengers. It was a bar-like structure. There were a few people having a drink on one side and 2 bartenders on the other, one of whom gave her a menu. As expected, everything was overpriced. Having not taken the breakfast included option in the hotel, and being unable to get breakfast at the Chamartin train station as planned, due to arriving with very little time to spare, she was famished. She was on a very limited budget and had to be careful, but her head was pounding. She was both hungry and angry now. Giving in, she pointed at the photograph of a grilled sandwich and asked for a coffee to take away with it. Paying almost €10 for that seemed like daylight robbery, but it didn't really come as a surprise, as she had summed it up in her head already. "Can I have 3 of these menus, please?" Lorenza turned to the voice coming from her left. A small woman, who she guessed to be in her 60s, was pointing at something on the menu. She had silver grey hair, and her figure could be described as carrying a few extra pounds. Noticing she was being observed, the woman smiled at her. Lorenza was ready to just nod and look away. She was surprised by the smile. It was sweet and unassuming, and she found herself, against her will, responding. "Do you speak English?" the woman asked Lorenza. "I'm sorry, I don't speak any Spanish, aside from hola and gracias." "Yes, I do." Even speaking in English brought back difficult memories. She knew that aside from a few words in Spanish for the next 8 days, she probably would have to use it more often. "Isn't this just a lovely country? I haven't been able to see much of it, but I just love the feel it has. Where are you from?" the woman asked Lorenza. It didn't take a genius to guess from her accent that she was American. She reminded her of her mother, always ready to start a conversation with anyone she crossed paths with. The thought that the recipient of her attention would be an unwilling participant never crossing her mind. She forced herself to smile and give some sort of reply. "Yes, it is. I'm Italian. I live in Naples." "Oh, how nice. We have been to Rome, but did not have time to visit other cities. I told my husband we have to go back. Now that he's retired, I hope we can do more traveling. Is this your first visit to Spain?" "Yes, it is. I had always wanted to, but somehow life kept getting in the way," Lorenza replied. "I know just how you feel, but we're here now. Let's make the best of this experience. I've heard so much about the cuisine, too. I'm really looking forward to all the fresh seafood. Oh, look, our orders are here. I have to get back to my 2 men. We are getting off at Giare. We came to do the Way of St. James. What about you?" "That is also my stop, too," Lorenza was forced to reply as the woman looked at her expectantly. "Oh, good! I hope we get to see each other some more then. I'm Helen, by the way." "I'm Lorenza. Yes, we probably will." Helen had kept talking until Lorenza pointed out her seat. Then the friendly American had written down her mobile number for her and asked that she call her when she got to her hotel, so they could have a drink once they had both settled in the city. Lorenza reluctantly kept the paper in her bag, knowing she wouldn't call. It really was an effort for her to be polite. She needed to be alone this holiday. She just had so much to work through. She was afraid her bad mood would somehow find its way to the surface and she would snap, something she really didn't want to do. Helen seemed lovely. She had only been so angry one other time in her life, and she still had not gotten over it yet. 7 Nights and 8 Days by Patricia Asedegbega Nieto. Sample read by Domino Lane. If you've enjoyed Chapter 1, be sure to grab your ebook or paperback copy on Amazon now. To connect with Patricia, you can find her online at any one of the social media links on your screen now.